What's up, guys, and welcome back. This is Rob of Rule of Two Review, and today, just how much money will PlayStation Now really cost you? Okay, so this news comes to me via an article that is on GameSpot. I'm going to go ahead and link that down below for you guys so you can check it out if you want. And right now, PlayStation Now is in its beta period. A lot of you may know that. PlayStation Now is Sony's digital streaming service for PlayStation 3 games that's been made available for or will be made available for the PlayStation 4. Maybe also for the PlayStation 3, I would think so, because it's kind of working in a rental structure. They also announced at E3 how it's going to kind of be available for Sony Smart TVs and stuff, but I'll get into that in a minute. Regardless, you probably know what it is. Like I said, it is right now in its beta period. And via the beta, there's been some news, again, reported in this GameSpot article below, that is detailing some of the early testing prices that Sony seems to be using right now. Again, it should be noted for all the information in this video and everything from this article, all of these prices and everything that I'm going to talk about, which isn't really super positive as of right now, is effectively trial stuff. It's like I said, it's in its beta, which means the prices and the pricing structure is probably also in its own beta sort of test phase. They're probably testing the waters, trying to figure out exactly what feels comfortable, what makes them money, what gamers feel appreciative of, whatever is kind of the best value that also nets them the most profit, which is, I mean, Sony's betting pretty heavily on PlayStation Now. I think they spent a lot of money to purchase Gaikai and create this streaming digital service. We found out that this is what it is that they're doing it for, which is PlayStation Now. Not something I'm really super thrilled about, which I'll also get to later in the video. But anyway, I'm going to kind of go over some of the details in the article and some of the prices and kind of see what it is that you guys think. So really, the long and the short of it is that as of right now, all of the test prices available on PlayStation Now via the beta are pretty darn unreasonable. I hate to say it. I'll give you some examples that are actually mentioned throughout this GameSpot article. They say that there will be apparently, okay, so actually let me detail something a little bit first before I get into the number details, is that again, PlayStation Now is operating, as far as we know, only in a rental structure. And I just kind of assumed that meant you were going to pay a couple bucks, a set fee, what have you, and then you would have access to the game for a day if you purchased it for that long, 2 days, 3 days a week, and maybe different prices per. But it actually seems to be a little different because listen to these prices. Something that they say is the company said that there will be shorter rental prices as low as $3 and longer term ones that will generally fall between $3 and $20. That's a pretty big range, but depending on what you're getting, it may actually be worth it. But here's the thing, is apparently a lot of these rental periods, if not maybe even all of them, we don't know right now, might actually be by the hour, which to me is just insane. So they say, for example, a lot of this I'm reading verbatim via the GameSpot article, by the way. They say, for example, it costs $5 to rent Final Fantasy 13-2 for 4 hours. That's insane. I can't believe you would even rent a game for a couple of hours. Now, there's some other values here that seem a little bit better. It then goes to $8 for 7 days or $15 for a month. And then you get into bigger things, and that's kind of interesting. I don't know how much that stuff is going to stick. But when you look at the hour structure, I just don't know how I feel about that. They also mentioned the indie platformer Guacamelee. That is $3 for 4 hours. Okay, still renting it for a couple of hours. And then $6 for 7 days. However, you have to consider, again, these prices compared to the full copy of the game. Guacamelee, again, as they mention here in this article, is a $15 digital download on the PSN store. So $15 for that. Or they have it listed here, $15 for 90 days. So there's obviously a lot of disparity happening between how much they're charging games for what period, and also based on the initial value of the game, what it's selling for in its retail or its digital format. So those, again, are just some very basic examples of prices and rental periods available via this article. And again, in the beta period only of PlayStation Now. It is not yet released to the full public. This is really just, I don't know, kind of interesting to me because, like I sort of said at the beginning of the video, PlayStation Now has never really super excited me. I don't really know that there's the biggest market for it. I know that it costs Sony a lot of money. I think they're banking a lot on it. And there's certainly a value to having access to, PlayStation 3 games, I guess, and maybe paying less money to have them for a period. But I just think that right now, with how much they've spent, it's going to be really tough for them to sort of figure out a pricing structure and a rental period model that's really going to justify PlayStation Now and whatever prices they charge, especially if they're looking at this amount. It should be noted, again, the article mentions the same thing, that there is talk or rumors of a subscription model or something where PlayStation Plus subscribers might get a discount or access to some games for free and some other ones not. Who knows? And that could change things a little bit. So you're basically looking at, I liken these two structures to different things. You have the actual rental period where you're paying, like I said, a couple of bucks for a couple of hours or a couple of more bucks for a couple of days. And then you also have the subscription service where it's maybe a couple of bucks a month and you have access to certain things or all things on PlayStation Now, what have you. And I liken those two, the first one kind of being like Redbox and the latter one being more like Netflix, of course, or Hulu, Amazon Prime, things like that. Excuse me. So when you consider that, it kind of makes you realize exactly how much they really need to be considered charging for these. Because right now, when you look at how the Redbox structure is, it's like $1 or $2 to have a movie for a night or two. And, Netflix is $8 or $9 now a month or what have you, and you have access to all these different things. And those are pretty good values overall. It's a little bit different when you're looking at games in two senses of the word, and one works to the advantage of PlayStation Now and one works against it. One of those being that, the fact that games, there's more content. So when you consider paying $1.99 for a movie for a night, okay, that's what it is, but a movie's a 2-hour experience. If you're paying for a game experience for a night, that's a lot more content that's infinite. You can play it over and over again. If it's a good game, it's replay value. You can make your own story. You can play it hours and hours and hours on end and all that kind of stuff. So that's sort of a good point. But at the same time, again, you have to look at how much it costs to actually own that game. So you're looking at a $60 game. And if you're going to charge $5 for a night, you have 10, 15% of that full price. That's a lot of money you're paying for one night of a $60 game. A little bit different when you're looking at a movie that's only 10, 15, 20 bucks to buy. You're spending $1 or $2 to rent it for a night. That value, I think they kind of come more to a certain parity between the two where they make a little bit more sense, The streaming service, it's a little bit different. They obviously should charge a little bit more, the streaming service, the subscription service. They should charge a little bit more if in fact they do that. And I think I would almost bet $1 million that yes, they're going to do that. That they could certainly charge more for, because if you're getting access to every single game on PlayStation Now, as much as you want a month, I could see that going as high as, $20 a month, $25 a month. And that actually could be worth it depending on the content and depending on if that gives you access to play any game available on PlayStation Now at all times. Excuse me. And you can just sort of pick and choose and mix and match and access anything you want. Now, something deep in my heart tells me that is just not going to be the case with PlayStation Now. I have this feeling that if they do the subscription service, it's going to be still kind of limited in the same way that PlayStation Plus doesn't let you play every game for free or download every game for free, but it lets you download some games for free. And PlayStation Plus, don't get me wrong, is a value. I'm a subscriber and I enjoy it. PlayStation Now, we'd be looking at a little bit different of a structure. I feel like the best way to justify it for most gamers, most hardcore gamers and Sony PlayStation 4 fans, is going to be to make it so that you can access every single game available on PlayStation Now. And that may really prove difficult for Sony to do, considering how much money they have had to spend to sort of get this whole thing going. And so like I was saying, therein lies the problem. Sony has the potential for a pretty cool service. But again, it's going to be really tough for them to figure out the pricing on it. I've mentioned this before when talking about PlayStation Now. Michael Pachter, who I'm sure you probably are familiar with, who understands kind of the monetary side of the business a little bit better than I, of course, do. He's got a few really good videos and opinions that he's shared publicly about PlayStation Now and how difficult it's going to be for them to create the value in the consumer's eyes, as well as charge the right price that both A, makes people happy, and B, nets enough profit for Sony to justify having PlayStation Now. He's laid it out in a much better way than I ever could, just because he's more knowledgeable about this subject. This is more what his line of work actually is. So I definitely encourage you to look up some of Michael Pachter's thoughts, opinions, and videos about PlayStation Now, because I actually, I agree with the guy. I like him enough. I agree with him about 50% of the time. This was something that I actually do really agree with him on. And like I said, I'm not really super into the idea of PlayStation Now, but I think it could be a cool service for a lot of people. The thing that I think it's the most beneficial for is what Sony talked about at E3 on stage, when they mentioned that Sony smart TVs will be able to give people access to PlayStation Now. That is a pretty cool idea. That's a great way to reach a bunch of people who aren't actually gamers or would never buy a $400 PlayStation and spread the market and grow their audience. I think that's a tremendous value. For a couple bucks a month and the price of a DualShock controller, you can access all these great PlayStation 3 games via your television. That is amazing. Super smart decision by Sony on that. When it comes to actual hardcore gamers like you and I, people who spend hundreds of dollars on PlayStation 3s and PlayStation 4s, it's a little bit different. It's hard to kind of put the whole thing together in a structure that really makes sense. Not to mention, the reason I'm not as into to PlayStation Now is kind of for the opposite reasons that I really enjoy and appreciate Nintendo's Virtual Console. And you might say, well, why would you do that? If you like the Virtual Console, shouldn't you appreciate PlayStation Now? Because they're kind of the same thing, and a little bit they're the same thing, but ultimately, no, they're really not. The Virtual Console is celebrating some of the best games of ages, decades, and generations past. We're going back to the 80s and 90s and early 2000s even with some games. That is completely different than last year's games and last generation's games that you can still walk in and buy in GameStop. The Virtual Console is giving you access to games that you can't buy anymore. You can't find anymore unless you have your old cartridges. I would have to think, I don't want to profile without actually knowing, but I would wager more than half, if not maybe most of you guys, most of my listeners, you guys might be a little bit young. The current generation of current gen gamers is certainly, several years younger than myself as someone who grew up with the Atari 2600 and the NES. And so you might not have really been experiencing games even as far back as the cartridge days. A lot of you might have grown up with the N64. For those of you who are, older than that, maybe my age or did grow up with these older games, don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to single you guys out, and I appreciate we share that same perspective. But for the younger guys, you might not be able to really understand exactly how cool it is to be able to download something like Solomon's Key or Castlevania 2 or even the original Zelda or Mega Man, because the Virtual Console allows us to do that. Same with Super Nintendo games like A Link to the Past and Alien vs. Predator. If they bring like the Turtles games, and actually I think some of the Turtles games are available now. I mean, that stuff is great for us. PlayStation Now is everything we played a year or two ago. That's still available. You can walk into GameStop and buy it for a couple bucks. You can trade in games for it and not have to pay anything out of your pocket. I mean, these games and experiences are so fresh. IGN and GameSpot and Game Trailers and VG Charts, these places are still talking about some of these games like they're relevant news. And Sony is charging you to play them like they're this great, amazing deal and this amazing bundle to access digitally and stream them to your system, when honestly that's probably less efficient and is sounding like it might be more expensive than just going and buying the used copy for a couple bucks. And then you'd actually have a copy of the game, So that's kind of why the Virtual Console and stuff like that has its place. PlayStation Now, with what it's doing, I don't really think it's the most maybe the best thing that they could have been doing with the Gaikai service. Granted, there could be other things in secret down the road that they're planning that we don't know about. That's an exciting prospect, so we'll have to see what pans out, a couple years down the road into the PlayStation 4's life cycle. And I also think, it would be really cool, and this also may eventually happen. It'd be really cool if we start to get access to PS1 and PS2 games through that. Now, if that happens, which, like I just said, for all we know, could happen at some point, and I think they would be stupid not to do this, that would change everything, because that's going back to the same concept and idea of what the Virtual Console for the Wii and the Wii U have done, and the 3DS, by giving you access to games you can't really buy or find anymore. Put the original Oddworld and the original Medieval and Valkyria Chronicles and, the original Final Fantasy VII and some of those great, amazing PS1 classics, Chrono Cross, things like that we would love to play. People will pay you a couple of bucks to rent or play or stream those games for sure. And I think that would be a much better justifiable value for the PlayStation Now service than what they're planning on doing right now. But again, in wrapping up this video and my thoughts on it, don't forget, I am a Sony and a PlayStation fan big time. I love Sony. I'm going to go pre-order my white PS4 Destiny bundle tomorrow. Literally, no joke. I can't wait to finally own one. And so I think that, and we also can't forget that, again, PlayStation Now is only in its beta. We don't know the future. We could get older games down the road. There could be other plans for the Gaikai streaming service separate from PlayStation Now in the future. And as far as this pricing, it's early. It's in its testing phase. They're obviously testing the waters and trying to find out what works. We can only hope that they realize these prices don't really seem to make sense. And let's wait and see if they actually do release a subscription plan. And if that plan turns out to be, honestly, a pretty good price and a good value. If it turns out to make sense, I will certainly be in support of it because I'm a Sony and a PlayStation fan. And I love a lot of the best PlayStation games ever across all three previous platforms. So, it'll be really cool to see what happens. I don't love what's going on with it now. I'm not excited for it personally myself right now, but it's at the point where if enough details and prices change, I certainly would become a much bigger fan of it than I am. All right, and so that's it for the PlayStation Now news and beta pricing for today. Of course, if you like what I'm doing, you can feel free to subscribe, like and share the video, share your comments and your thoughts below. And of course, thanks for tuning in. I will catch you next time.